CDP is celebrating a milestone today in partnership with Sue's team, the launch of CDP's new corporate questionnaire aligned, we heard it, with IFRS S2, the ISSB climate standards. So let's dial back into London and also connect with Sue, who's in Singapore, to uncover what this means for disclosing companies, why the global baseline for climate disclosure is so important, and how the ISSB is being picked up in regulation across the world to drive action. Over to you, Sherry.
Thanks so much, Merla, and hello, Sue. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I think it really exemplifies our partnership. Thank you for joining us from Singapore.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on such a special day for CDP.
It's a special day for both of us, and actually I think that that's what I'd love to start this conversation about. Is you and I have spoken many times about the relationship between ISSB and CDP being a game changer in the sense that actually it provides the ability for companies worldwide to be able to disclose to the ISSB S2 standard in a way that helps them understand what their compliance obligations will be this year, and soon the regulation will be in effect in various markets around the world. Tell me from your perspective, we're excited about it, and from ISSB, how is it that this helps the companies that you're looking to serve?
Yes, you're right. It's a special day for us, and we're just as delighted as you are, because I think there's a real synergy between what we're trying to achieve at the ISSB and what you're trying to achieve at CDP. And this is really making sure that we get the high quality comparable information out there in the market about climate, but not only climate, but climate-related risks in a way that is efficient, but in a way that's efficient for companies. And so for us, really exciting that we're able to describe CDP as ISSB's key global climate disclosure partner. It's a big deal for us to have CDP in this role, and for S2 to be, the foundational baseline for the climate disclosures in the CDP questionnaire. And for me, I said, as really a two-way benefit. For us, it's a fantastic way to make sure that the information that we're asking for in S2 is provided out there in the market. CDP as an enabler of getting this information out there into the market. And it's a way for companies to prepare to comply with the ISSB standards. If you've got this data ready to fill out the CDP questionnaire, great news, you're well on the way to being able to comply with the ISSB requirements, which are going to be rolled out into regulation all around the world.
I love how you've made that practical, because the reality is there's lots of high-level discussions when you talk about climate change and the action that's needed for climate change, and even when we're talking about disclosure, often it's very high level. We're talking about a partnership that brings us to being very practical. And you mentioned so many jurisdictions around the world are looking at ISSB and trying to make sure that they're ready for being able to accept and align and comply. You're sitting in Singapore, but obviously, we see this as a global baseline through the IFRS's efforts. I mean, how's that going? How is uptake going? How is it that you're seeing the global interest in the ISSB standards?
I think the short answer is better than we had dreamed of within less than a year since we finalised the first two standards, IFRS S1 and S2, our climate-related disclosures, and only in July last year did the International Securities Regulators, IOSCO, endorse our standards for use around the world. And since then, we've seen incredible interest in terms of jurisdictions making decisions or consulting in their decision-making to decide how to use our standards to introduce regulatory requirements around the world. So now we have more than 20 jurisdictions who have made decisions or are consulting on our standards to be used directly or incorporated into their regulation. And it represents a lot of the globe. The statistics that we were really proud to share this week at the IOSCO annual meeting were that more than 55% jurisdictions representing more than 55% of global GDP, more than 40% of global capital markets, more than 50% of global GHG emissions are on this journey towards the application of our standards. So that really means, if we go back to the CDP questionnaire, that wherever you are in the world, this is relevant disclosure to be collecting to be ready for reporting. And I think one of the things that's really interesting for me when I look at the range of jurisdictions that are engaged in this journey is just how wide and varied it is, from Canada to UK to Hong Kong to emerging markets in Nigeria, Brazil, and just this week we had China announcing their proposals to build on our standards. So this really is a global movement. And so I think CDP is a perfect partner for us to work alongside as we see this big change in regulatory reporting.
Great, and it's fantastic to hear. And that word global really does resonate. Certainly that's what CDP has been set up to be, which is that global neutral disclosure platform that drives comparability across data sets. Already we're really proud of having over 23,000 companies worldwide disclose, and we're really seeing that demand for increased disclosure, onboarding into the system, being able to align with standards. A lot of that comes from the access to capital that is either now in front of them or what companies hope in the years to come will be their path to a public market, or indeed, some of those early exchanges for their shares and for raising capital. My question for you, Sue, is how is it that, tell us a bit more about why you're so sure that the questions that ISSB S2 are asking are what investors want and what investors need?
Well, for a few different reasons. One is that we've had huge engagement with investors and stakeholders in developing our standards. So more than 1,400 responses to the proposals when we put them out. And the fact that we have built on existing literature wherever we could. Importantly, building on the TCFD recommendations, which form the foundation for both of our new standards and which is fully incorporated into our S2 disclosures. That shows us that this is the information that's market proven and where there is market appetite. And so really seeing that investor demand and knowing that what we're asking companies to provide is the information that we know is going to be useful and relevant for decision making. This is a good use of your time. And also talking to companies to explain how this is also information that's really useful for good governance and management of companies to create value, to manage risks, and to find opportunities, as well as attracting capital to fund important transitions.
It's a really important point, Sue, and we've spoken about it, and certainly we've even spoken about it earlier today, which is that data disclosure isn't for a single use. And that's something that I think that we should really lean into, because it isn't free. It sometimes isn't very easy in order to be able to get really accurate data that investors need and to comply and to be aligned with the ISSB S2 requirements. But we know at CDP that those data points are not just used by investors. They're increasingly being used to take action internally at businesses to be able to drive down not only their emissions, but also being able to understand, measure, manage their effects on nature. They're thinking about how it is that they use water and be able to create an environment that is going to be positive going forward. Of course, compliance is becoming an increasingly important driver of all of those actions. I guess my question to you, Sue, is how is it that we together can make sure that we're helping companies think about what actions can be taken from this data, and how is it that we can work with regulators and policymakers for the data not to just stop there, that actually the action that we hope to be taken for a more sustainable and a green financial future becomes reality as quickly as possible?
Well, getting these standards used, I think, is important, and getting this data out there in the market is really important to affect change. Really explaining to companies how the information that we're asking for is really relevant to businesses, governance, and making decisions, and having it utilized in businesses as well as in the markets, and really getting regulators to see the value of this information, to get regulators to support this global baseline, which will benefit us both and the market and companies by really affecting change and making sure that capital is allocated efficiently in the right places to fund these really important transitions that we need all around the world. And what's been really interesting for me as part of the discussion as well when we talk to companies is how many companies, smaller companies and companies in emerging markets really see the benefit as well of this information for their trading relationships. knowing that their suppliers, their customers are going to need this information for their reporting as well is another really important driver here that we're seeing in our conversations with jurisdictions and companies in emerging and developing markets.
Yeah, I'm hearing that as well, Sue. I've had the pleasure and honor of doing a bit of traveling to various places that are hugely important to CDP and are actually adopting and certainly using ISSB standards as that global baseline going forward. And what we're seeing is that actually data is being used really to comply with requests not only from investors, but also from clients, from customers. And that's pretty compelling because if that same data set can be used in both places, it's not just about sort of access to capital, it's also about making sure your ongoing business is thriving and is successful. And actually, the point that you've just made there about suppliers, really that kind of nudges into this question about scope 3. And what we're seeing at CDP is that, with our supply chain program, a number of the world's largest suppliers and even some of the smaller and medium-sized suppliers really are asking for this data for very practical purposes. Some of it is really starting that they can comply. They can actually get the data that they need in order to be able to put through some of their scope 3 numbers. But the really exciting piece is when they're looking at the data that they receive and think about what action that they can take together with their supply chain to drive down emissions, to think about how capacity building can not only be at that buyer level, but also be pushed through to the supply chain. And as those companies grow, obviously they're going to come into the access to need other capital, innovative products, and again, that baseline of being able to disclose to the ISSB S2 standard really helps, not just the big listed companies, but certainly the supply chain that serves them. I know that's something we've spoken about before, and it's certainly something that I think that we can lean into.
Yes, totally. I think it's really important because it's really affecting change. And often when we talk to people about meeting these disclosure requirements, they talk about the difficulty of getting data. And I think that the more that are filling out the questionnaire, the more information we're going to have that we can all share that enables the whole value chain really to engage and to have the information they need, not only for reporting, but for really important decision making to understand where there's opportunities for change. And so I really do see this as a symbiotic relationship in terms of all of the benefits that can be realized.
Absolutely. A quick pivot into something that both of us just touched on slightly in our remarks, which is thinking about nature, thinking about water, thinking about forests, thinking about some of these other impacts on our natural environment. I know that ISSB and IFRS has decided that it's going to explore nature-related standards in terms of its next step in the future. CDP is delighted to be partnered with you on that journey as well. Tell us more about what you're planning.
So what we're planning to do now is to really build out our global baseline. So we have 2 standards already. S2 is our specific climate disclosures, which are now aligned in the CDP questionnaire. S1 asks for information on other important sustainability-related risks and opportunities that are affecting companies. So we already ask for information beyond climate, and now we're going to build out the specifics of that. We already have the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board standards in-house, so that's already relevant. But we've decided to work on 2 new themes. One is biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services, where we plan to take a very close look at the work of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And the other is human capital. And that's not just your own employees. We'll be looking at the issues associated with workers in your supply chain as well as your own employees. And I think it's really important that we get onto these new topics because the very nature of sustainability-related risks and opportunities is that they're not in silos. They're all very interrelated. And so climate affects nature, affects human capital. And so just bringing these things together really allows us to have a more complete picture. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with CDP, in fact, to build out our standards and your questionnaire as well as we look forward.
Great. Well, we've got a fantastic starting point at CDP, having asked questions about water and forests and land use for over 10 years now. So we're ready to jump in and make sure that when we think about reporting on nature and climate, those things are working together. As you said, it's a Venn diagram, so to speak, with some overlap there. And certainly I think that we've got our work cut out. You know, in the next few years, we're going to try and be as efficient and effective as possible so that we lower the reporting burden for companies around the globe and make sure that we have the essential information we need together. Sue, thank you very much for joining me. I know your schedule is incredibly busy, and thanks for celebrating today with us. It's a special one for us, and I'm delighted to have you here. Thanks again, Sue.
Thank you so much.